Good evening. Welcome to week 2 of our Resilient Aging series. Tonight we're going to talk about the power of connection. And if I remember what Nirmala told us last week, of the 9 elements that go into the evaluation of a blue zone area, 3 of them are related to our relationships and our social gathering. So this is clearly a very important part of our series tonight. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. Now, Nirmala Dhar, who is a member of Lake Oswego United Methodist Church, and she is the one that has us here tonight, and I'm thankful for her to getting us together and coming up with this program. And look forward to hearing each one of those weeks. And if you don't know yet, week 1 is already available on Blue Zone Living on our Lake Oswego United Methodist Church website. So, on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Okay. So, thank you. So Nirmala, many of you already know, she is a licensed clinical social worker with a master's degree in social work. She got her master's at Washington University in Missouri and the Bombay University in India, so she has 2 masters. Over the last 36 years, she's worked in Missouri, New Jersey, and now in Oregon. She works for the state of Oregon, at the Oregon Health Authority Behavioral Health Unit. And we are very grateful to have her with us and to have her share her knowledge and her gifts. Nirmala, welcome.
Thank you. Before we start, you all have a clipboard, and I just have a few announcements to make. Let me just get this into my pocket. Okay. There is a handout which for you to take home, and at the back we have included more references if you want to do a deep dive into this topic. So that's available at the back. I also want to bring your attention to this brochure. This is the senior loneliness line. We call it a warm line as opposed to like a crisis line, where people who are lonely and who are older can call 7 days a week. This is a warm line that is funded by the Oregon Health Authority, and it is provided by Lines for Life. So please share this in your communities, this brochure. And then very lastly, before we begin, there is a little 3 questions, and this is really for self-reflection, and you all have a pen. If you can take maybe 2 minutes to complete that, and the way you score it is with 1, 2, or 3. 1 means hardly ever, 2 means some of the time, and 3 means often. And so there are 3 questions. This is just for you to do, as a reflection, and then we will begin our presentation. And your results are for you to keep. So very quickly, I just want to tell you, if you're, then you kind of add all your 3 responses. So the way this works is if your responses add up between 3 and 5, it's considered you're not lonely. And if it is 6 and above, it's considered that you're lonely. And by the way, this is what we call a validated screening tool. And we are actually asking medical providers of all types in their clinics to actually administer this tool to their patients. So I was just giving you a taste of that. So thank you for doing that. So again, I just want to begin with the connection to living life more abundantly, as in John 10. And what I said last week was that how I interpret the abundant life is abounding in fullness of joy, strength of spirit, soul, and body. And today I want to also bring your attention to two verses which really connect to our topic. One is Mark 12, 30 to 31. And I'm not going to read the whole verse, but it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And then the other one is Philippians 2, 3, and 4. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interest of others. And there are several other, vital scripture verses which kind of illustrate the topic that we are going to talk about today. And here it is, the power of social connection. And that social connection is good for our well-being. So I want to begin by this. We as humans are hardwired for social connection. From birth to death, we have this need to belong. Do you know that, and by the way, we are supported by relationships across our lifespan. So in the 19th century, many infants who were in orphanages in Europe and in the US, 50% of them died. And it was very startling, the number, and they called that kind of malady marasmus, which comes from the Greek word meaning consumption. And it's also called infantile weakness and atrophy. Anyone wants to guess? 1 in 2 kids were dying. Yes, infants were dying. Yes, absolutely not being. So this was a very sterile environment. Kids were not held, were not touched, were not cuddled. And that lack of attachment and contact actually killed kids. And so that was, so subsequent to finding out what it was, they changed their kind of care philosophy where kids were held. They started placing kids in foster homes before they could be adopted, so they would have that kind of contact and attachment. And what's the biology behind it? Do you know what happens when kids cry or are in distress? What happens to the mother? There is a secretion of a hormone called I'm going to call it a medication, so I have to always be sure I'm saying it right. Oxytocin. And once, when the mother hears the infant cry, this hormone is released in a very big way, and that actually also goes to her mammary glands, and so then the milk is generated and she breastfeeds the child. So it's a survival mechanism. And so much so that now oxytocin is called the bonding hormone. So bottom line, we are hardwired to be social beings right from birth. And social connections, not surprising after I told you what happened to infants, impact our health and well-being even today. So we are here today to celebrate the power of social connection. Because I've already stated it is absolutely important for our survival. And that's what we did when we were still kind of hunter-gatherers. We realized the importance of staying together in bands, staying together in family groups, being more cooperative. All of that was really for survival. And so our relationship with friends, co-workers, faith groups, other community members can have a major impact on our health and well-being. Many people are socially connected and have very stable and supportive relationships, and they are more likely to make healthy choices when you are in a stable and supportive relationship. They're also better able to cope with hard times, and I'm going to talk a lot about the stress buffering effect of social connection, and really the neurobiology behind it. So people who are connected are better able to cope with hard times, stress, and with anxiety. And also what's important is the quality of our relationships. So they also matter. Sometimes it's quantity, but also quality matters. So what are some characteristics? So the number, the variety, and the types of relationships you have. How diverse is your group of friends? Have you included all age groups in your circle of friends? Are they, people with varied interests? Having meaningful and regular social exchange, whether it is virtual or in person. A sense of support from your friends and your family. You have a sense of belonging. There is a seminal, seminal psychological theories. How many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Do you know what one of the primary needs in the middle of the pyramid is? Love and belonging. So these seminal theories of psychology all talk about the need for love and belonging. And so sense of belonging, and I think we discussed that also last week. What happens to people who are socially excluded? What impact does it have on them? What happens to people who are discriminated? I work with people who are seriously mentally ill, and guess what? They are socially excluded, ostracized, and are discriminated against. Feeling loved, cared for, and valued and appreciated by others, and that is a lifelong drive to be loved and valued, right up to death. Having more than one person to turn for support. So having this kind of social network. And then access to public areas to gather and recreate, which is our age-friendly kind of age-friendly city or community that we are really promoting. Okay. So what are the health benefits? We already talked about what happens when there's a lack of attachment, a lack of contact. Kids were dying, infants were dying. But look at the health benefits. Social connections can prevent serious illness and improve health outcomes for heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression and anxiety. Social connection with others can help improve your ability, I've already talked about, to recover from stress. And here we are talking about resilience. It's your ability to recover from stress. Promote healthy eating and physical activity, improve sleep and well-being, reduce your risk for violent and suicidal behaviors, and prevent death from chronic disease. So it's well established that there are multiple reasons, good reasons that it impacts your health. Social ties affect your mental and physical health as well as your mortality risk. That's what I just said in the previous slide here. It's put in a nice pithy slide for you to remember, that social ties are important. And then there's social disconnection. I just told you there are large groups of people who are ostracized, who are socially excluded, who are discriminated. I grew up in India till a young adult, and we have in India, what's endemic is Hansen's disease. It used to be called leprosy. It's now called Hansen's disease. And they suffer a terrible plight because it's such a disabling disease, and it's very visible, on the outside. And they are totally ostracized to the extent that and India has a limited social safety net. So many of them are reduced to extreme poverty because they're excluded. So there are large groups of people who are socially disconnected. And this refers to an objective, long-standing lack of social and family relationships and minimal participation in social and family and kind of family activities. And a kind of an absence of social connectedness. And so there was this very large study, it's called a meta-analysis, And they controlled for many kind of confounding factors, and what they found was an increased mortality risk of almost, you can see, 32% in individuals who were socially disconnected. Do you know that people with serious mental illness die 25 years younger than the general population? And they don't die from their mental health issue. Like, they don't die from their schizophrenia, from their bipolar disorder. They die from cardiovascular disease, from diabetes, from lung cancer, from respiratory disease. So they die from medical health problems. And partly, I think the reason is stress and information, which comes from this kind of social disconnection and social exclusion. 1 in 4 adults age 65 identify as being socially isolated. And it could be higher when we drop the age to 60. So this is for age 65. And again, the message is, when you feel lonely, it's bad for your health. And that it has serious, serious consequences, which we talked about. Did you know that lacking social connection can increase the risk for premature death as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day? And what they're doing is they're comparing a smoker who has a 1-pack habit, a 1-pack-a-day habit. Similar to when you're lonely, you have an increased risk for heart disease, depression, and for dementia. So even though you're not a smoker, the effects are very much like you were smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day. So there's a difference between social isolation and loneliness. And so I just want to kind of unpack that very quickly. They are related, but they are different. Social isolation is objective. That means it's very obvious. You can count that you have few social relationships, you have few social roles, you don't belong to many groups, and you have frequent social interaction. And it can be due to many things. You may lack transportation, you may have a chronic illness which doesn't, is not conducive for you to get up and go and meet people. So that is social isolation. It can be measured. However, loneliness is subjective, and that's the test you all took. It is an internal state. It's the distressing experience that results from perceived social isolation of unmet need between what the individual has and what they envision as like the perfect social network. So that is internal and subjective. My loneliness may look very different from yours. While isolation is more objective, you can actually measure it. How many friends do you have? How many times do you go out a week? How many times are you on Facebook? Do you have broadband access? How often do you connect? So those are all very measurable. But they are very much related. So I do want you to remember that loneliness is subjective and it's internal, while social isolation is more or less external and objective, that we can actually measure it. So what is social connectedness? We just said the power of connection, correct? The degree to which people have and perceive a desired number, quality, and diversity of relationships that create that sense of belonging. Remember Maslow, love and belonging. And being cared for, valued, and supported. That's really what social connectedness is. That I feel valued, I feel supported, I have a good social network. So how do these connections help? They could be cognitively stimulating. If you're in a book club, you come to church and you're involved in some group like you all are here today. Relationships also promote healthy behaviors. They are contagious. If you belong to a group of friends who go walking, you will probably pick up that habit too. So it's contagious. And I've already talked quite at length that social connections buffer stress. So this is how social connections influence our health. As you can see, there is at the biological level, at the psychological level, and at the behavior level. So at the biology, I talked about hormones, correct? I already talked to you about the bonding hormone. Then do you know there are stress hormones too? Anyone wants to tell me what the stress hormones are? Cortisol and yes, adrenaline. Yes. So biology is stress hormones. So when you are lonely or you perceive loneliness or you're socially excluded, what happens is you've activated your stress response. You're stressed. And what happens with stress is you release these hormones, and that causes inflammation, which, by the way, is the leading cause of all of these diseases we talked about last week and today: cardiovascular disease, diabetes. It's like an inflammatory response. And there's something called gene expression, that you may have chronic disease genes which are dormant, but because you have this high stress level and you've activated these hormones ongoing, that you actually, those genes become active. So that's essentially, it's called epigenetics. And I'm no expert in epigenetics, but essentially those genes then are expressed when you have high levels of inflammation. Then look at the psychology. If you lack meaning and purpose, and we talked a great deal about it last week, and in fact, Jeannie was showing me earlier that she went and got the book from the library, Man's Search for Meaning. So I can't emphasize how important that is. And, meaning and purpose also means you know who you are, you know what your place is in your social circle, you're a valued member of your society. What does our society do to older adults? Yes, we erase aging, correct? We actually erase aging in our culture. We segregate older adults. We most often think of them as not contributing, which is absolutely wrong. It's just the opposite. But so it's very, very often older adults really have that kind of, lack that meaning and purpose. Then there is that stress, safety, resilience, and hopefulness. Those are all those psychological variables. We talked some about that. And then there's behaviors: physical activity, nutrition, stress, smoking, treatment. All of these contribute towards and influence your health. So, and we've talked about how all of this impacts can negatively or positively impact your health. So essentially, here are the increased risk. And by the way, those links at the back of your paper will give you the citations for all of this. Though some of my slides have the citation, if you can read it at the bottom, they're there. But look at it. It increases dementia by 50%. Heart disease by 30%. Do you know that we talked about it last week, it's the leading cause of death in the United States. Like in the top 10, the number one is cardiovascular disease. And for the majority of it is very much gendered, so it's primarily men, but women are catching up on that. And then stroke, a good 1/3, 32%. So strong social relationships are obviously good for your health. That's kind of the thesis that we're exploring today. And that they're associated with 50% more likelihood of overall kind of survival, that it increases your longevity. And again, going back to our Blue Zone's presentation, 3 of the 9 involve some kind of social connection. whether it is to your faith community or to your family, or you're meeting regularly for happy hour or chatting with your neighbors. And here, if any of you are interested in using this, this is just another way of telling you what I just said earlier. Increase in early death, and then increase in stroke and cardiovascular disease. And that is so critical because that is the #1 killer of Americans. And so I don't want to kind of reiterate again, but I wanted to tell you how having strong social relationship is so important to cardiovascular health. And it is considered a protective factor. In fact, I was reading from the American Heart Association. They have this big campaign on social connection, the American Heart Association, that it is protective. And it's protective for controlling such things as blood pressure and cholesterol levels, which are, by the way, the underlying causes are often inflammation. So how do people get to be at risk? Like, what are some risk factors? Having lower income. Why would you think that's a risk factor? Pardon? Okay. And, you're basically just struggling to survive. There's really no time to kind of connect. And poverty in itself is stressful. So having a mental health diagnosis such as depression. And why is that? Because people who are depressed are something we call them, they are behaviorally deactivated. They just don't feel like connecting. They feel fatigued or tired. They may be sleeping a lot. So what happens is you don't have much of a social network, correct? So in particular for depression, being marginalized and discriminated. I just talked about people with serious mental illness. I talked about people with Hansen's disease, and we can talk about a lot of other groups, whether you're an in-group or an out-group, and how that affects your health. Challenging to accessing resources. Stress due to lack of resources, which kind of connects with that poverty that I was talking about. Having a chronic disease, which kind of impedes you from really getting out, meeting people. It kind of isolates you in your home. Having a long-term disability. During the pandemic, there was a big focus on social isolation and loneliness. And, I work with people who have disabilities. And you know what they told me? Nirmala, welcome to our world. We are socially isolated, lonely all year round, not during the pandemic. And that was a real eye-opener for me. We just take it for granted, right? But there are, pardon? People with disabilities. Yeah. They said, welcome to our world. This is our world, not just during the pandemic. We are socially excluded. We are isolated. Yeah. I was recently doing a presentation with a colleague online for people with intellectual disabilities. And they have such high rates of bullying. That means other people bully them, socially ostracize them. And they have one of the highest rate of female people, women who have intellectual disabilities have the highest rate of sexual assault. I mean, that's a shame. Being unmarried, unpartnered, or living alone. So do you know marriage is protective? Being a victim of violence and abuse, and major life transitions such as divorce, losing a job, losing a loved one. What's another major transition which many of us have gone through or are planning to go through? Retirement. Yes. Being a widow. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. So in late life, these are some unique, so those earlier ones are, across the adult lifespan. This is more for people who are older, worsening physical health. Bereavement, whether you're a widow or you've had some other kind of bereavement. By the way, bereavement can happen for loss of independence, loss of a limb, loss of an eyesight, loss of eyesight. Being female, widowed and divorced, and never married. Why? Because women outlive men. Remember, we talked about last time by about 5.5 years. And that women who divorce in their 60s don't often remarry. So they remain single, while men do at much higher numbers. Having little contact with friends. Then there's also differences in race and ethnicity, people with dementia, and community dwelling versus long-term care facilities, like if you're living in a nursing home. How do you know you are at risk? And we gave you the handout, and the one there is a list of items there that kind of tells you what you're at risk. I just want to point out to a few. Having language barriers. Can you imagine you come to a country where the dominant language is English, and you're an immigrant, you want to learn English, but it's going to take you some time, and you are very often socially excluded because you can't speak the language. Experiencing age, race, ethnic, sexual orientation, gender identity discrimination. Do you know which ism is alive and well? Which prejudice or discrimination? Ageism. Yeah. We are doing, through my work at OHU, we are doing a ton of work around ageism. But that's kind of the last frontier, that it's okay. You just need to go to a gift card store, right? And see the cards, correct? In fact, we did a program in Washington County where we did a competition for youth to create cards which had positive messages about aging, as opposed to over the hill, you're decrepit and you're you're just falling apart. So, and it's deeply embedded in our social narrative. We can laugh, but that's how it is. And do you know that people die earlier because of ageism? There's a researcher in Yale, that's all her work is on ageism, Dr. Becca Levy. She says people die 5 to 7 years earlier because of ageism. And by the way, we also internalize it ourselves. That means it's not another problem. We ourselves discriminate against aging. People who live in rural areas who are unsafe or feel unsafe. People who have trouble hearing. Did you know it's a risk factor for depression and dementia, hearing? And we call it a modifiable risk factor, that you can actually change it, that if you have a good hearing assessment and get appropriate hearing aids. But it can be very lonely and isolating when you can't follow a conversation, where you can't hear what people are saying, so you stay in your room. Or you are saying the answer you gave to someone asking a question is like bizarre because you didn't hear the question. And so then there are some cultural drivers in our culture. Hyper-individualism. For us, individualism and autonomy is like sacrosanct. It's like a holy cow, right? While in many other cultures, individualism is not the top driver. It's really a community orientation, a group orientation. But in our culture, it is hyper-individualism, which kind of promotes this kind of loneliness and social isolation. Mobility. If you are not mobile, it affects, correct? How you interact, where you can get around, how you can get places, how can you get to groups that you are interested in joining. Speed and efficiency, you may have like slightly slower, what we call processing speed, and people are talking at the speed of light, and you've kind of lost them at the first word. Religious disaffiliation. Do you know Oregon is one of the most agnostic states in the Union? So religious disaffiliation. How many of you have heard of the deaths of despair? So this was a study done actually by two economists, and they looked at large quantities of death data, mortality data, and they were noticing that in the Midwest, like Missouri and all those places, there were middle-aged adults, 60 to 70 or 55 to 70, who were dying by suicide and by liver cirrhosis, cirrhosis of the liver because of alcoholism. And so they were calling it deaths of despair because they were disenchanted. Many of them had lost their jobs to technology. They really had nothing to look forward to. 20 years ago, you could live well on a union job and get a fairly good salary. All of that was lost. And one of the reasons was also religious disaffiliation. They did not have that connection to any kind of faith group. So it was a combination of these reasons, and that whole study is called Death of Despair. Death of Despair. So please look it up if you're interested. Look at all the others, valuing youth. We talked about our culture, which worships youth and beauty and actually erases aging. And tribalism. And I don't even want to go down that path. It's rife with, contention right now. But there's so many divisions, right? And basically what it does is it excludes people and pits people one against the other. And that's really some of the cultural drivers of loneliness. Did you know in Oregon, a third of Oregonians live alone? 1/3. We are a population of 4.2 million? 1/3 of that population. And I'm not suggesting they're all lonely. It's just a fact. They live alone. That is more than 500,000 people have no one else in their household except for that one person. I work in the area is aging, and my mind always goes right away to social policy. If you're living alone, you're aging, what kind of social policy should we be creating for people who live alone? Who lack that kind of support from, say, a partner or a spouse or a well-connected family. But 1/3 live alone. 50% of older adults, 70 plus, are women. Women live alone. And the current cohort of women have lower socioeconomic status, the current age cohort. So they have many other social determinants of health. So they have a heavy burden of that too, in addition to living alone. Do you know what this is, this graph? It's called the U-curve of happiness. And if you can see, so one axis is satisfaction, other axis is age. What does it tell you? At age 90, you're really happy, correct? And then you're very happy when you're an infant and a child. You're in the pits when you're age 50. So this is actually the U-curve of happiness, which basically says that for the most part, older adults are very happy and satisfied with their lives. And this is all research, etc., but it's called the U-curve of happiness. However, in spite of that, older adults do experience changes in their life that puts them at a higher risk for social isolation, even though you may be the happiest person. And that late life particularly places us, makes us vulnerable to social isolation. Again, I talked about this Harvard study last week. I'm not going to go over it, but what the surprise. So they were following sophomores from Harvard from 1938, and it's the longest study of human development. And what they found was taking care of your body is important, but tending to your relationships is more important. That's what the study is concluding. And I already talked about being married, and marital satisfaction has a protective effect on both health and mental health. And part of this study, that adult study, found that people who had happy marriages in their 80s reported that their moods didn't suffer even on days when they had physical pain, whether it was arthritis or something else. And those who had unhappy marriages felt both emotional and physical pain. So bottom line, good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains. And then there's this socio-emotional selective theory. This is put forward by this very famous gerontologist, Laura Carter. She talks about as we age, our time horizons shift, correct? When you're 40, you think you have, 50 years to live more? And so your horizon is quite far. When you're 70, it's getting closer. When you're 80, it's even closer. So correct? So your time horizon shifts. And what happens to people who have this shifting time horizon? They focus more on emotionally meaningful goals and cultivating positive relationships. Like, no more drama in my life. I'm going to focus on relationships that are meaningful to me. And that's partly a function of this changing time horizon. How many of you know of Erik Erikson? So he has these stages of development, and with each stage you have certain developmental tasks you have to complete. And for older age, anyone knows what it is? Despair versus integrity. So those are the tasks. Are you happy with your life? That's integrity. I've left a good life. I'm pleased with what I did. I made a contribution, as opposed to despair, which is what if I didn't do this, I didn't do that. So it's very different developmental tasks. And so this is kind of tied to that shifting time horizon where you focus on relationships that are important and meaningful. So what is social connection? What are social connections? So there's the structure. How many do you have? What is the variety? And how often do you kind of meet with them? Then there's the function, the degree to which they actually serve various needs, like they buffer you from stress. You have a good time just socializing. So what's the function? And last is the quality. Are they predominantly positive or are they predominantly negative relationships? And so here are some examples. So structural, remember the kinds of relationships you have. So marriage, living, if you live alone, social isolation. Functional, you can see whether you receive support. A quality is, how good is your marriage? Is there relationship strain among siblings, adult siblings? Are you socially excluded or included? So bottom line, structure, how often and who you connect with. Function, what support you get from your connections. And how you feel about your connections. So this may be a good way for you to reflect on it right now to see, what's my structure, function, subjective quality of my relationships. And remember I talked about it being a stress buffer? It helps you cope with stress. So what actually happens is, stress? You're activated, correct? You're secreting these hormones. How this acts as a buffer, social connection. We talked about I always say oxycodone, which is an opioid. I'm talking about the hormone. That hormone actually activates a parasympathetic nervous system, which actually brings down your stress. So social connections are good for you because they alleviate that stress reaction. It's a stress buffer, and there are myriads of meta-analysis studies done which talk about the stress buffer. People with more stress report lower social connections. And conversely, those who are connected report mental well-being. And so, bottom line, connections are healthy for you. You know, some grandparents talk about caring for their grandchildren makes them happier, more active. They experience strong emotional bonds. They lead a more active lifestyle because they're running after their grandkids. They eat healthier, and many of them stop smoking around their kids. So I'm just giving you one example of how social interaction, which is intergenerational, can be healthy. Here are the benefits. Increases your lifespan, improves your physical health, brightens your mental outlook, boosts your self-esteem. Hey, if you belong, you're loved, why would you not have good self-esteem, right? Facilitates greater empathy for others, helps you recover from disease, fosters a sense of meaning and purpose in your life, triggers the release of stress-reducing hormones as opposed to stress-producing hormones, provides heightened sense of security and belonging. That's basically on the Maslow's hierarchy, that's the bottom of the pyramid, is feeling safe, physical safety. It promotes that and shapes your health throughout the course of your life. This is our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Our individual relationships are an untapped resource, a source of healing in plain sight. They help us live healthier, more productive, and more fulfilled lives. By the way, he has an excellent book. I forgot to give it as a resource. It's called Together. The book's title is Together. I would highly encourage you. It's available in our libraries by Dr. Vivek Murthy. And let's see, I'm just going to, what can you do? Understand the power of social connection and the consequence of social disconnection. Whom are you excluding? Whom are we excluding as a church community? Invest time in nurturing your relationship. Seek out opportunities to serve and support others. Be responsive and practice gratitude. Actively engage with people of different backgrounds, ages, and experiences. It helps your well-being. What can we do as a church organization or any other organization? Create opportunities and spaces for inclusive social connection. Embed social connection in all internal policies, practice programs. Actively seek and build partnerships with other community institutions. Advance education and awareness like we are doing today. Create and provide education resources for your community on social connection. And foster a culture of connection in the broader community by highlighting examples of healthy social connection. That means lead by example. And here, establish and maintain, I'm giving you some ideas, establish and maintain, devote time and attention to develop relationships, reach out to sources of support, strengthen the quality of your communication by building high quality relationships, and address your personal barriers, for why you're not connecting to people. So what actions can you take? Nurture and strengthen your existing relationships. Maybe invite a person for coffee or go on a museum date. Schedule a time each day to call a friend or to visit a friend. Meet your neighbors. Don't let being a non-driver stop you. Use social media. Stay physically active. Take a class to learn something new. That way you also meet other people. Revisit an old hobby, visit the community center. I mean, there are tons of check out faith-based organizations, lots of stuff. And then we talked last week also about volunteering, and I talked about the bi-directional benefit of volunteering. And, it has been it's a long-held common ethic in the United States that every year people give off their time without expectation of compensation. but that this benefit is bidirectional. It benefits the person who's volunteering and the recipient of your volunteering activity. Again, I'm just not going to go over all of them, but how many of you, I know people who don't know their neighbors and they've lived there for 20 years. They've never seen or spoken to their neighbors. Again, I want to end with what Dr. Vivek Murthy says. Like many other things that I find profoundly empowering about addressing loneliness is that the ultimate solution to loneliness lies in each of us. We can be the medicine that each other needs. We can be the solution other people crave. We are all doctors and we are all healers. Stay connected. Combat loneliness and social isolation. And I thank you for being here. So do we have some time for a few questions? We have maybe 10 minutes for any kind of questions or comments.